Delighted to be joined right now, fresh from his press conference this morning, the leader of Reform UK, Richard Tice. Good afternoon to you, Richard.
Good afternoon, Julia. And yes, the home of common sense and the common sense policies from Reform UK that I talked about this morning.
Nice link. I'm loving your work there, loving your work. Right, look, the big news today, of course, is that Nigel Farage, who said yesterday he was going to think about it overnight, and then he trundled off to the pub, has decided he will not stand. He's going to put his efforts into Donald Trump's re-election in the United States rather than the British election. Are you disappointed? Is that a big loss?
I'm thrilled, actually, that he said that he's going to campaign with us over the next 6 weeks through until July the 4th. He never said he was going to stand. There was no expectation for that.
You know, there were lots of people. There were lots of people expecting that he was going to stand, and he was umming and ahhing. He talked about it himself.
Lots of people, Julia. Lots of people love to speculate, but the reality is that he's not been able to campaign for us before. He is now. That's going to be a great help. I've always said the more help he can give, that's fantastic. And we're going to push on, and we're going to put out the message that actually, if you vote Tory or Labour, you get the same thing. You get higher taxes, you get lower growth, you get slower healthcare, and you get mass immigration that's reducing the quality of life, reducing wages, and it's making it harder to get on the housing ladder. It's putting unbelievable pressure on housing, huge pressure on healthcare, and undercutting and depressing the wages of British people. And in particular, what mass immigration does, Julia, is actually impacts the youngest the most significantly. And it's just patently not fair. The numbers this morning, a city net the size of Manchester arrived in 2023. And the Tories have lied to us, they've betrayed us, they told us that they were going to get immigration below 200,000, and actually they've done exactly the opposite.
Yeah, well, originally they said 100,000.
Much more challenging.
Well, there's no doubt at all about that. We've just spoken to...
Okay,
we've just spoken to a former Tory, Downing Street Director of Communications, Gita O'Hara. They talk about trying to get hold of this. Of course, these are legal arrivals. They've got absolute ability to literally, they can, stroke of a pen, they can make that decision. They've chosen not to. A lot of people feel they've been lied to. Here's the thing. We've got a lot of people, a lot of our audience who've been getting in touch, not just today, in recent weeks and months, saying they want to vote Reform. But what they're being told by the Tories, and increasingly going to be told, is you vote for Reform UK, you're going to get a Labour government, so don't take that risk. What do you say to that?
We've seen in the last few weeks, vote Tory, get Labour, as Tory MPs have been bailing it and bottling it and bailing out of the Conservative Party. Look, if you vote for either of the main two parties, you are voting for higher taxes, you're voting for slower healthcare, lower wages and mass immigration. There's no difference between the two main parties, and it's very simple. We present a bold plan for change. The country's in a terrible state. The Tories have broken it. Labour will bankrupt it. If you want change, you've got to vote for it. You've got to vote Reform UK on July the 4th.
Right. So people vote for Reform UK. You're standing 630 candidates across 650 seats. So the seats that are doable. The reality is, though,
we're not standing in Northern Ireland.
Northern Ireland, exactly. But in terms of completely different politics over there, obviously. But in terms of first past the post system, in terms of the financing you have, the campaign you can run, the infrastructure you've got, you know as well as I do, this is pie in the sky stuff that you're going to become the majority party. Even if you get MPs elected and you end up having some influence in Parliament, realistically, you're not going to go into coalition with Labour if they're the largest party. Richard, we are looking Richard, let me finish. We are looking at a Labour government. So is the aim of the Reform UK vote, is that to elect a Reform UK government, really? Or is it elect a Labour government and destroy the Tories? Is that your real aim?
Look, the reality is that if you believe in democracy, and you and I do, voters are better off if they've got a broader range of options to vote for. And that's why we're putting forward a completely different agenda. We know the country's in a terrible place. If you vote for either of the main two parties, you are heading towards catastrophe. And our aim is quite clear. We want to shape and influence, and we've already had that in shaping influences. The Prime Minister's cut and run against what he promised his own MPs just a few days ago, because he's terrified of Reform UK going up in the polls and the Tories sinking in the polls. We're already shaping the influencing. He's already made announcements copying some of our policies in recent weeks. So look, we are having a significant impact on the debate, and it's very clear. If you want to shape and influence, you've got to be on the ballot paper. We're going to be on the ballot paper, we're going to make a difference, and we're here for the long term. Everybody writes us off, but the truth is that we were at 1% when everybody laughed at me 3 years ago. They're not laughing now, they're absolutely terrified.
No, I'm not in any way writing you off. I know our audience isn't. We see the reaction to what your policies are. But there's no doubt at all Reform UK, in all your iterations beforehand, the Brexit Party or UKIP, have been influential. No doubt at all about that. The question is what the impact of a Reform UK vote is this time round. And is the reality that actually it will lead to a Labour government? I'm not saying the Tories deserve to stay in power, but are you happy to have that in return for what you really want to do, which is to destroy the Tories, break the Tories, and establish Reform UK as the official alternative to Labour? This is about a long-term plan. This isn't about what happens on July the 5th, new forms of government. It's about a longer-term plan.
You're doing such a brilliant job. You should be head of our comms, Julia. I mean, you absolutely set it out.
You know, I hold a candle for no political party.
I know, I'm only teasing. Look, the reality is that this is a long-term plan to provide a clear alternative to socialism. The two main parties are varying forms of socialism.
Labour's not a socialist party. The Tories aren't socialist.
They're all parties that, I'm sorry, Julia, they absolutely are. Socialism stands for higher taxes, higher big government spending, big state, nanny state, mass immigration. That's what they all stand for. We're standing for the opposite. We're standing for higher wages, lower taxes, higher growth, faster healthcare, reformed healthcare, and smart immigration by freezing immigration until the country, frankly, can catch up, as opposed to mass immigration. So we offer a serious alternative. It's a medium to long-term journey, and we want to shape and influence them. That's what we're going to do. By the way, we also want a much better voting system. It's called proportional representation, where every vote counts, every vote matters.
The trouble with proportional representation is, as we know, you see what happens in the elections across Europe, where you have coalitions. It takes months to form a coalition, and smaller parties end up having a lot more power. You end up with your green parties and others managing to influence
other parties. It's called competition,
parties.
Julia. Competition's no, Julia, nonsense. We share first past the post in Europe with Belarus. It's not great company, is it? And you say that, but look at Scotland, look at Wales. Under proportional representation, the SNP have dominated for 15 years ago or so. Under proportional representation, Welsh Labour have dominated in the Senedd for the last 15 years or so. So actually that completely proves your point is wrong, Julia.
Apart from the fact that, of course, across Europe we are seeing different parties arise. Just want to find you talk about immigration. You mentioned about having a freeze on immigration. Look, I think immigration is too high. I think anyone who's got their head screwed on thinks it's way too high for both economic and cultural reasons. A freeze on immigration, though, at the end of the day, we still have businesses who need these people. We still have public services who need these people because we haven't trained up so many people of our young. We're not going to instantly train up enough doctors or enough engineers or enough house builders, are we?
Which is why our policy is actually smart immigration. About 500,000 people leave the UK every year, so you can welcome the same number, 500,000 people, highly skilled, highly qualified. You can have an exemption specifically for essential healthcare. Of course, you can do all that.
Well, then you're going to end up with 1 million people a year.
But Julia, no nonsense, Julia. That's called net zero. I know you and I are not fans of net zero, but actually net zero immigration is the same thing. If 500,000 leave and 500,000 people arrive, then your net number is zero. And that includes, by the way, a reduced number of international students. The abuse of the international student visa system is an absolute outrage. And here's the thing, Julia. In the 1980s and 1990s, when we didn't have mass immigration, actually, our own healthcare system worked really rather well, and wages went up much higher than they do now. Funny that, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly. Most of the healthcares in the world systems don't seem to require to have huge numbers of migrants, do they? Richard Tice, if you had to put a number on it right now, how many MPs do you think you're going to end up with come July the 5th?
The more people who vote for us, the more millions who vote for us, the more MPs we'll get. I'm ambitious. You have to be an optimist in politics, and I'm one of those, Julia. All
right, Richard Tice, Leader of Reform UK, thank you very much indeed, joining us from the same place where they had their press conference a little bit earlier today. Richard Tice, as I say, joining us there. Benedict Spence still with me in the studio. What did you make of? I mean, look, Richard Tice is always very optimistic soul. Talk about this, but the reality is, they're coming from a long way behind, aren't they?
They are. I mean, as you said, 3 years ago they were in an absolutely hopeless place. Now they're doing sort of relatively a lot better. But nonetheless, what is in front of them is a lot more beatable, actually, than it was 3 years ago. And they really do need to... It's that strange thing. They're doing very well, but they should also be doing better somehow. I mean, you asked him how many MPs does he expect to get. He wouldn't give you an answer.
That, really.
I mean, but really, we expect maybe one, because Lee Anderson, I think, has given himself a fighting chance by leaving the Tories and potentially splitting the vote because he's a big enough character. I think 3 would be fantastic. And, that's not great,
but would that have an influence, or is it a starting point? Because we see some of the other parties in other parliaments in Europe have actually, they start at a small level. But that's the thing. The reality is, and they've been quite open about this, Nigel Farage and Richard Tice, that actually they want to smash the Tories. Nigel is still consumed with anger over the betrayal on Brexit, wants to destroy the Tories. The idea that what is left of the Tories after an election routing, if that is what happens on July the 4th, those people are, you might be left with the sort of the one nation wet Tories, in which case there's no way of those parties coming together, in which case Reform UK offers that opposition. But realistically, we are talking... Again, you never say never. Things could happen, but we are more likely to be talking about a party that is seeking to become a serious contender as opposition rather than a player in government.
If they're able to smash through and get as few as 3, if it's, say, Mr Tice, if it's Mr Habib, and it's Lee Anderson, and they manage to keep, he keeps his seat as well, then you've got 3 relatively well-known, compared to the rest of Reform UK, characters who are also very good talkers, they're good on policy, they're good politicians, relatively. I think that would have a bit more of an impact in terms of ultimately shaping the direction that the Tories go in, actually, in the interregnum sort of period. And that, I think, is going to be crucial. What's going to create space, if Reform is to survive, is as much what the Tories end up doing as what Reform ends up doing.
Yeah, indeed.